Hi, so first I want to ask, who needs voice interpretation? We do have people in the audience. Okay, great. We will keep the interpreters going then. My name is Karen Millsap. I'm from Southern California, born and raised, moved to Kentucky. I don't have any shoes on because I'm on platform, and I only had my heels this morning, so it's not a Kentucky thing or something California thing. Hi, I'm Amy Milzinski, and after 12 years of marriage, I still don't quite have the name down, getting it pronounced and fingers forward. It's still a challenge. Milzinski. Okay, so today it's a packed full house, but we don't want this just be a lecture. We do want interaction. We want the comments and questions and the participation. We want to hear about your experiences because you all have rich experiences, and the two of us are not the only experts in the room. You guys are also experts, and you bring a lot based on your experience growing up, based on the things that you've gone through on a daily basis, based on the things you've seen from other people. So it's going to be hard to come all the way to the front to make comments. So if you raise your hand, stand up, and then we will cop a sign so that everybody can see. And so the topic that we're going to be talking about today, which will competency, we're talking about differences, men and women. What are any differences that you see just between men and women? Let's get this started just to get your brains working. Anybody? The way we dress. Women wear dresses usually, sometimes. Men wear pants. And we're talking about in general stereotypes. Not that men have to wear pants and can't wear dresses. That's not what we're saying here, but generally. We just want to frame the conversation. Okay, thank you. Body structure, body shape is different between men and women. Okay. What about communication? Do men and women communicate differently? Men are often more direct, don't say as much, get to the point. Women add a little more and talk more for longer, right? What other differences do we see between men and women? Feelings. Growing up, society teaches men to not show their emotions, not show their feelings, to keep them inside, to suppress those. And society is more encouraging of women to share their emotions and share their feelings. Okay. What are the differences? Can you think of? Yes. Tone of voice? Yes. Men usually have lower voices. Women usually have higher voices, different intonation, right? Men are more compartmentalized as far as feelings and thoughts. Women are more connected in that regard. Okay. Karen's saying the spaghetti versus waffle comparison, right? Okay, how about in the workplace? If you have a female supervisor, female employer, I'm an assistant assistant manager for the department at Eastern Kentucky University. I have been for the last 3 years. If I am direct with my subordinates and tell them they have to do X, Y, and Z, if I'm blunt, how is that taken versus if I was male and said the same thing? Is that different? I've noticed personally, maybe it's not viewed this way, but internally it feels like I can't really be as direct as I want to be because I don't want to be perceived a certain way because I'm a female boss. Any other comments? Jenny Lynn?
Good morning. My name is Jenny Lynn. When folks are raising their hands to make comments, do they identify who they are? That'll be helpful for me and my interpreter team to know who's doing the talking. So yeah, it would be nice to know who's speaking.
Okay, I'm Amy, I'm presenting right now, and then Karen is with me. So, yeah. I'm Amy, I'm Karen, okay. So that just helps, that discussion helps give you an idea of what this workshop is going to be about. We're going to look at different frames. Okay, this is Karen now. So, frames. We want to keep this image in our mind during the whole workshop. Frame how we see things. Frames can be changed. Frames can be adjusted. Frames can be completely thrown out and replaced. It's some part of cultural competency, it's part of diversity to have these different frames. So we want to keep this at the forefront. And deafness isn't one specific frame. And it's important to remember that how we respond to things, it depends on the frame that we're looking through. And that we need to be aware of that and perhaps change that. Analyze what frames we're using to see the world, and that helps us to be culturally competent. Okay, so what can we expect for the rest of the workshop? We're going to talk about deaf and hard of hearing people and the challenges they've faced growing up. We're going to watch a few videos of people telling their story about what worked, what impression they felt and experienced, and their journey. We're going to share some statistics, which I'm sure most of you already know about in this field, but we're just going to quickly go over those. And we're going to talk about cultural norms. What are deaf and hard of hearing cultural norms? And then there are some norms with deaf and hard of hearing that conflict or with hearing norms, that cross-cultural conflicts. So we're going to talk about how we can avoid those conflicts, what we can do to resolve the conflicts. And then competency, cultural competency. And cultural competency deficits. Through our research, Karen and I have seen that people tend to have deficits in being able to identify a few of those cultural competencies. So we're going to talk about deaf students, deaf clients, and cultural competency deficits. And then at the end, we're going to talk about practical applications and strategies for how deaf people can grow in a positive manner, how we can have a positive attitude and perspective on working with people we work with, our clients, and helping them to have successes, and how we can work successfully with those clients so that you can be successful at your job. Okay, what does culture mean? Let's make sure we have a common understanding of what culture is. This is Martha. It's a way of living, just put simply. Okay, it's a way of life. Somebody else. It's language. You want me to stand, right? This is Stephen. Culture can be common interests, things we enjoy. Yes. It can mean traditions. Values. Culture means community values. Great. Okay. Also, it can include many, many different things. Usually people think of culture in the big picture and forget about all the little details that are part of that make up a person's culture, that they internalize, that contribute to who they are. the people you hang around with, the people you socialize with, the interactions you have, the food, the language, the culture, the people, the smells, the identity, all those little things make up who a person is and what their cultural identity is. And on our laptop, we have some words in red that isn't coming through on the PowerPoint, but students and educators' lives is in red. We emphasize, even though culture doesn't apply just to education, it applies to every facet of our lives. So it's important that we understand that culture is not just language, it's not just race, it's not just ethnicity. It is so very much more. And that's what we're going to look at, and we want to have a better understanding of. So cultural competency, let's give a definition. We've got 5 pieces to this that we're going to go over briefly to define cultural competency. The first is valuing diversity. Valuing the diverse ways that people are, not just that we know skin color is different, and we know language is different, and we know ethnicity is different, but that it's more than that. Diversity is much more than that. Even within the deaf and hard of hearing world, there is a wide range of diversity that's at play. We've got Deaf Plus, all the different things that we can. We've got that kind of diversity. My university, Eastern Kentucky University, we are predominantly white, Caucasian. We don't have much racial diversity, but within that predominantly white student body, there is a lot of diversity anyways. It might not be visible right off the bat, but if we really take the time to take a look at it, we can see that there is rich diversity within that. So we can't just make those knee-jerk reactions of understanding that, thinking that there is or is not any diversity based on what we see on the outside. We need to give people a chance to show who they really are, to really get a feel for that and to value the diversity that is there within the person. Being culturally self-aware. That's part of cultural competence. Understanding how we can meet them where they're at rather than expecting them to meet us where we're at. Not us thinking that our culture is better and that people should accommodate us. That's the mindset that we want to change. That's the frame that we want to replace. We want to figure out how we can meet the clients and where they're at in that frame of diversity. So I feel that it's critically important that I not think that I am completely competent, but look for the competencies within others and look for others' strengths and use those strengths of other people and leverage their culture to use what they bring to the table. And that together, we're stronger. Sometimes, for example, at Eastern Kentucky, somebody from Lexington will be compared to somebody who's from the eastern part of the state. We'll hear their language and hear that their language is different, the way they speak English. And not mind, want to help, because we say don't mind in Lexington. But in the eastern part of the state, they'll say I don't care to, rather than I don't mind. And people not from that area think that when they say I don't care to, that they don't want to do something. But people who say that actually don't mind doing the thing that was asked of them. So there's cultural conflict right there, misunderstanding of language. And my mom would ask somebody from the eastern part of the state if they could help her do something, and they would say, oh, I don't care to. And then she would say, oh, okay, fine, thanks, anyways. And there would be this misunderstanding about whether the person was going to help or not. So it's important to recognize those differences and the dynamics, and we'll show some more specific examples later as we go on.
This is Karen. Okay, so for example, I'm deaf. I had a student approach me who was also deaf. This was one of my students. And they were very direct and said, I disagree. And I knew in the back of my mind, we're both deaf, and I kind of explained to them how teachers might be approached if it's asked in a different way on a chat. And I asked, first I started with asking why, and see how we can make this a teaching moment. I wasn't offended because I know the culture of this student. So this is a good example of cultural competence. Talking about institutionalizing cultural knowledge. This is Mary. Based on your organization, your schooling, the values and diversity in those institutions, the policies that are established can show that they cherish diversity. And when you work with clients one-on-one, that shows through. All of that becomes part of the organizational culture. For example, with the university, with their mission and wanting it to be diverse, and then having that reflected in the departments, individual departments, that then gets translated down to the instructors, the professors, and throughout the organization, that value for diversity becomes an institutionalized value, and it becomes reflected on all levels. And that becomes embedded within the entire organization. This is Karen. I just wanted to emphasize, going back to knowledge of student culture, it's not looking down on the individual. It's a frame that we use to look at them as equals, and then institutionalizing culture. I had an example at the university. I was teaching culture, and I wasn't really used to the hearing culture of the management and interpreting. An interpreter let me know of the tendencies, and I decided that we would work together. I'm big on cultural skills and competencies. And the first time I came in, there was an interpreter. The two of them, there were two interpreters. They approached me, and we'd be switching off, and how they set up in the room. And they were kind of spread out, and I learned, I was like, okay, I have to acknowledge my need and accommodate. It seemed to work out well, but that was one example of how I can contribute to the university my skills, and that's just one example. That's not often shared at the university level, the deaf perspective, and based on their experiences. You said there was two, could you explain that to 3 interpreters? Could you explain that a little bit more? And then you're blocking some of your view. Oh, sorry about that. Just expand on that example with the 3 interpreters. So typically we'll sit in a circle, and then we had, in the committee meeting, we would sit in a circle. And we had a chair sitting at one end, and so the way we position the interpreters, the interpreter would be situated around the circle, and that way they could look at the person who was speaking, and then at the interpreter who was right behind the person speaking, so they wouldn't have to look back and forth across the room to see the person speaking as well as the interpreter. And so the interpreters would indicate who was speaking, and then the interpreter that was closest to the person speaking would take over and interpret, rather than having to look at one, and when they were done, look across at the speaker. So there wasn't just one interpreter in one single place. We could look back and forth, see who was speaking, and see the interpreters at the same time. It's also very important to include the student's perspective, the deaf person, deaf and hard of hearing person's perspective, and our experiences in the field. A lot of us, we have the same struggles and experiences, but we don't have the data, or it's not really, hasn't been emphasized what is really behind what's going on, and so that's important as well. And this is Denise Beria. She's from California. She was placed in the foster system, and She knows the issues that are typically involved with being a foster parent or someone who's in the foster system. She hears well and speaks well. She can sign. But she still relies on interpreters. But she says she can hear and speak and work well, but she still works with interpreters. So she has a different perspective that we can learn from. Now Denise is on here. Hi, my name is Denise, and I will be talking about my life and how it has changed as far as access to communication. I have two different examples that I will use. The first example is when I was growing up. I lived in many different foster homes. I moved around a lot, and I didn't have access to sign language. Someone would just talk with me when I was 11. And so I grew up without access to sign language or communication. And it was very difficult. I struggled a lot with life issues at that time. Felt I had no support, there was no support system for me. But that all changed when I was 11. I started learning American Sign Language, and I was able to communicate with other people, and now I have access to communication, and I had people there supporting me, and that was a big difference. I had different adults in my life who were helping me with the challenges of growing up. And that was a big positive in my life. It helped me with my self-esteem, it helped me with my self-confidence. It helped me to understand that I'm not alone. There were a lot of other students and a lot of other children and families who have access to communication and go through these difficulties. And there are a lot of challenges that are very difficult to face alone. It's not good. And so it's helpful to have those support systems in place. The other example is when I was a student at Rochester Institute of Technology, RIT. I didn't really feel a benefit. I didn't feel the connection there. But when I switched over to attending Gallaudet University, it was very different. There was a lot of staff, teachers, faculty, and employees who worked there, all who could sign. Everyone was using American Sign Language. And the culture was very different. And I preferred going to Gallaudet more than I did going to RIT. It wasn't just the access to ASL communication, but it was everything. It's kind of hard to explain. They just spoke at RIT, or they only had a requirement for interpreters to sign, for hearing teachers. It just wasn't the best way for me to learn. I'm a very visual learner, and that's something that I realized, that I'm a visual learner and I have a very hands-on way of learning. And then when I went to Gallaudet, when everything was done in ASL, all the teachers were presenting in ASL, I felt it was a real benefit for me. And I think everyone should have a right to access communication. It's such a critical part for many things in your life, in general life skills, whether you're going to school or work, those relationships. It's important to have self-confidence. That's it. Thank you. Bye. This is Karen speaking. I just wanted to clarify RIT and the difference between RIT and Gallaudet. At RIT, they tend to rely on interpreters for content, and the material is a very high register. And it's a struggle for interpreters to present that at such a high register. And then at Gallaudet, they don't have the interpreters, they focus on the content and how it's presented from the instructors. So that's one directly in ASL with the student. And so that's one key difference between the two schools. Okay, now I want to ask the audience about comments that came up in her story. I think a lot of us can relate, or there's similarities, or what kind of themes did you notice? One was communication access. Any others? relevant. And I think when she was growing up, she struggled. She didn't have a foundation of language. She wasn't really ready even to access interpreters. So Gallaudet had that all-inclusive where they were using sign language everywhere. So maybe after she graduated, maybe she went on to get a PhD, or she will go on to get a PhD, I don't know, we'll see. Frustration? Other comments from the audience? Belonging to an identity. At Gallaudet, at RIT she didn't really belong, but at Gallaudet she did. Any others? Connection, the natural desire for connection. With the interpreters, that was a struggle, but when interacting with someone with a similar identity, whether they're deaf or hard of hearing, they could connect. She mentioned she was a visual learner. She talked about learning style. Some people learn visually, whether they're deaf, hearing, or hard of hearing. This is Amy. It's very important to recognize the difference with deaf and hard and hearing individuals. Deaf tend to be more visual, hearing are more auditory learners. They rely more on what they hear, where deaf people tend to rely on more on what they see. So when you're working with clients or employers, or you're working with someone regarding placement or different educators, it's important to share that culture tendencies. A lot of times hearing individuals don't recognize or realize that tendency. And there might be some other things that are going on as well, and so you can consider all those options. This is Karen. Also, isolation or being very lonely. Okay, we're going to touch on what we know, and then we'll drill down on this topic. You know, we know that 90% of deaf children have hearing parents. 90% of hearing parents don't sign. 90% have cochlear implants. Other facts are known. Statistics about the 90% rule. Okay, I think that's about it. And then exposure to ASL is very limited. Hearing parents don't sign, and so students get exposure through school sometimes, or they're learning it at the same time. Those are some different frames that we experience. There's also limited resources. We're seeing that there's more and more, but where we find those resources and the quality of those resources sometimes aren't enough. Can we have a comment from the audience? So I have a question. Are you talking about it in general or not just school age? Because in high school, there's a lot of ASL classes being offered for hearing kids, and that is also incentivizing parents to learn ASL. Is that true? This is Karen. We're speaking about in general, the communication method, maybe some exposure to ASL. A lot of times parents don't know where to find the information about teaching their deaf kids. Some of the hearing students are learning ASL, but they can then find out where to get the information. I'm part of deaf culture, so I know where those resources are, where hearing parents struggle with that. This is Amy. It's important to recognize too, based on her comment, this is Amy. In regards to school and the number of ASL classes being offered, that's not standard across the United States. In Kentucky, we have very few ASL classes being offered that are credentialed. The teachers are, there is no credential for teaching ASL. It could be that someone gets placed in the classroom teaching the ABCs. If someone who can sign a little bit will get placed in to teach that class. They think that's good enough. There was recently one student, an honor student, who did some research with hospitals and providing information for parents who have deaf children and how to provide them resources, and they found that it was very limited. It's insufficient. So this ties to our comments about limited resources. And it's even worse in rural areas. So finding those experts who know about deaf fields and can share those resources is important. That was a good comment from the audience. This is Karen speaking. We had a couple of interpreters switch, so we're just waiting for them. So this is Karen speaking, and talking about social work and deaf social workers and how that people find resources. Sometimes they don't know where to start. Typically, they'll talk to someone at the hospital or an audiologist, or they'll find a program, and they just happen to stumble across a resource. Teaching at the university level, I experienced a lot of hard knocks. People in different disciplines share their experiences through conferences and going to different conferences. And it's not just deaf educators, but people in other disciplines as well. Okay, so we have a video. This is Gabe O. Hicks from Oregon. We'll just watch the video. And he's from Kentucky Commission on Deaf and Hard of Hearing, doing an interview with an individual about the foster systems and experiences. And that was Michelle, I can't spell her last name. Niehaus. Michelle Niehaus. So this was experiences of children in the foster system. There's a little bit different comments. So this one does have captioning.
And we're having technical difficulties. Now we have to log in all over again. Thank you for your patience while we figure this out. Hello, we're thrilled today to have with us Gabe Hicks. Where are you from, Gabe? I'm from Oregon. And when did you move to Kentucky? Last year, so now it's been a year. Welcome, we're thrilled to have you here. Thanks. The purpose here today is you're willing to share your stories related to foster care. Yes, I've got two different experiences. The first time I was placed in a foster home.
with a hearing family who didn't know sign language at all. I was scared, alone, and frustrated. How old were you? I was 5 or 6. I couldn't even communicate with the family. Couldn't understand what they were saying. I felt very alone, and I was very frustrated. After a week or two, I was taken out and placed in a second foster home. And the daughter in that home was deaf, and we were about the same age. And the entire family signed, the mom, the dad, the brother. I was astonished. I never knew that a family could do that. Sign fluently. My own family didn't sign that well. I was totally immersed in the world and their culture. And I gained a lot of experiences and love. And they were very warm. After about 3 months, I went back home. And I brought those experiences with me from the foster home. And I wanted to share them at my home in hopes of improving my relationship with my family. Amy, no, I'm not Amy, I'm Karen. So Gabe, at 5 or 6, has this memory from all that time ago, and it's so powerful that it's still with him today. Just having that access to language, to any language, a language, at the age of 5 or 6, or even at 2 or 3. And to this day, he still has fond memories of that family. And his hearing family didn't really change much after that experience, unfortunately. Any thoughts, comments? Sorry, tell us your name again. Hassad. So when he went back to his own family, did they learn to sign? Karen say, no, not much. Okay. Yes? I don't know if this is the right place to ask, but was social worker part of the foster care system? And would they have shared the information about that deaf family and the language? Would they have looked for a match, a better match as far as homes go? In Kentucky, is the foster care system trained in that? What varies from state to state? With Denise from California, the earlier video that we saw, that social worker didn't have those resources. She was brought in and there was a unit that took care of her. And then even within the state, it varies county by county. So whoever the social worker is for that area, that when you enter the system, you're stuck with that social worker, and for good or for bad. And so there's a lot of work being done to try to get the education out, to try to get the exposure there so that people know. But I know what that's like being part of that system myself. I'd love to take in a foster kid, but I'm not quite ready yet. So, but I know there are kids in the system who need language, and they're being damaged because of the lack. Kentucky training, okay. Often we do get emails in Eastern Kentucky, people looking for deaf foster families and asking if we know anybody. So we are part of the networking that happens, of course, and we try to do our best to connect people, kids with families, so that they can have an experience like Gabe. But as far as training out there, no, I don't think training's out there. There's still a lot of work that still needs to be done about sharing resources and teaching cultural competency, so that the people who are on the ground know what to do, so that these kinds of experiences don't happen again. that's part of that institutionalized level of diversity and cultural competency, on an institutional level. This needs to be improved so that individuals aren't impacted. Okay, so now we're going to talk about perspectives. This is from Benedict and Stecker. If you remember the website ASLIs, some of you are familiar with that website. So this next video is from that. This next part is from that, talking about perspectives and better options. So far we've been talking about language and only language, and that's one perspective. Give that example of don't mind, don't care. So we're going to look at some language that we use every day and think about perspectives and think about better options so that the whole experience is positive rather than negative. Doctors typically use the word diagnosed, which can create fear in people. A better option is identified. I'm identified, I am. It's something that I can own and express. It's part of who I am, rather than I'm just a diagnosis, or I'm diagnosed as, the identity becomes the disease or the infirmity. So just thinking about different everyday terminology and language that we use with clients and with others. Hearing loss. Again, that has a negative connotation. Something's missing. And if I have hearing loss, I'm missing something. How can I have a positive self-identity if from the time I was little and could understand what was being said about me, I thought of myself as having a loss versus hearing level and status. Communication options. Often doctors and audiologists will list off several options and ask the parents to pick one. So communication options, singular. But communication options, plural, is a better option because we're bilingual. I'm bilingual. We're bilingual. We don't pick just one option. My own experience, I didn't sign growing up until later. At that time, high school didn't consider ASL a world language or foreign language for credit. It wasn't until I was in college that I entered the deaf world and learned sign language and went to Gallaudet and had that rich experience that many of us share. And the idea of deafness, being deaf, that I am deaf, I had no idea about that. I didn't know there was a culture or a community out there like me because there weren't options to choose from. I didn't know there was this other world. So I believe strongly that we need to provide as many resources as we can and try to teach everything, teach ASL, teach English, teach reading and writing. If they can speak, if the child has the capacity to speak, encourage that, encourage them to develop all of the skills that they can for their own benefit. Because you never know which one option will work or will fail. Maybe a child has some residual hearing, but if they haven't learned ASL, when they lose that residual hearing, then they're out of luck. If they're learning both from an early age, then they have the choice of options, oral. Maybe they have the foundation laid early, but they aren't fluent in ASL until later, but they have that base. This is Karen again. So just to say something about communication option versus options. You've never heard anybody say, I wish I didn't learn sign language, right? You hear people say over and over again, I wish I learned sign language. So providing that option, changing the frames to include everything, I think is just critical. Typically you hear the words early intervention. Intervention having that connotation of you're not good enough, you don't know what you need to know, I do, let me help, let me stop you. So a better option would be early involvement. involvement, where we're working together. You know, there's a team, there's a community, there's a support system. We're helping each other, working together. Karen again. Pause one moment. Great, okay. Karen again. Just another frame, just early intervention, and hearing loss. If you're talking about hearing loss, that's kind of the end of the road. That's the end of the conversation. You don't hear, you can't include the benefit of adding a new culture, adding a new community. So that's why we're talking about better options. Now, deaf journey, cultural norms. Okay, so deaf cultural norms, give me some examples. What are some of those deaf norms that we all know? Physical contact. Mary's saying physical contact is okay, we touch. Is there anything else? Directness in the way we talk. And really we're direct and physical touch, but that directness causes a lot of cultural conflicts, and it's good to identify whether it's a cultural conflict or a personality conflict. And to do that, you have to know what the culture is first. So, deaf norms versus hearing norms, straight talk. Oh, yes, you have wanted to add. This is Martha. That people tend to talk and talk and talk and talk, and we don't keep it short and sweet. We go TMI. So straight talk versus sandwich feedback. So the sandwich feedback, you start with something innocuous, you give some feedback, and then you end with something innocuous. Whereas we just say what the problem is. Oh, that's right, sandwich feedback, you can think of positive, negative, positive. You say something positive, and then you kind of sort of almost say something negative in a critique, and then you say something positive again. Question?
Hi, this is Jenny Lynn. We also have a tendency to like to socialize in the kitchen.
That's right. And we're going to talk about how socializing leads to cultural conflicts too, so hang on to that. Also, deaf gain versus hearing loss. In the way deaf norms and hearing norms compare. That deaf gain, being deaf, being part of that community, gives us so much. And we contribute to society at large so much because of that. We have a connection and that gain that hearing people, whereas America values the individual and puts less emphasis on that community. So, there are other cultures with that identity, with that understanding that we can contribute to better, like the Hispanic community. So that's just in how society at large benefits. It's a different framework. Information sharing versus privacy, collectivism versus individualism, I just mentioned. And Amy here, this is just an abbreviated list. The list, we could go on and on with these comparisons. And then what Martha was saying about it's important to recognize that English is very linear. You go A through B, then to C. In deaf culture, it's not so linear. It takes, our journey from A to B is much different. At Eastern Kentucky University, we had a presenter who was talking about Latino culture and talking about all the parallels between Latino culture and deaf culture, and we learned a lot from that presentation. It was a good realization to
see that there's another culture, a hearing culture out there with similar parallels, with those similarities. And one example is this, that linear mindset versus that nonlinear mindset in the way we relate stories and understand the world and share. So when we're teaching, when we're working with clients, when we're helping employers understand their employees, it's important to understand these two approaches. If you're going to talk to a deaf person, a deaf client, or a deaf employer, or a deaf employee, you need to consider this. Karen here, talking about my own experience. I had a student come to me, a hearing student taking a placement test with a deaf family, and just beautiful language. The student already had beautiful language. And I read through one of their paper, and they were talking about how deaf people tend to take a long time and go on and on and on. And
So this person wrote their paper in a way that was very similar to deaf ones. They went on and on. And so I provided the student feedback on what they were looking for, having more direct language to talk about points. Not saying a point and then that leading off on a tangent and making comments about those tangents and then coming back to another point. What they're looking for in this placement assessment is more communication that is directly to the point. And this person passed with a high score on the reading and writing, and not so well on math, and I expected the opposite. And so when I work with someone who is from a similar culture or a similar experience, we can connect them right away, and then we can work from there. So you can see cultural mediation happening from the quote. A lot of this, you are born, it's an innate knowledge, it's something that cannot be taught. I'll let the person in this video introduce themselves. Hi, my name is Nathaniel Muncie. My name sign is the 3 hand shape on the shoulder. I'm from Iceland, and I work with language corpus. I went to EKU University, sometimes we affectionately call it EKI, and I was a family there. I was involved with a lot of students who were studying different fields, interpreting. A lot of students were deaf or hearing. And it was a very rich experience that had a huge impact on my life. It changed my life in a specific way. And I went to a workshop about deafhood from the presenter's name was Marvin Miller. And that workshop, I think that was back in 2012, the summer of 2012. There were 3 deaf instructors at EKU at that time. Since then, 2 of them have moved on. One was Karen Millsap, one was Laura, and the other one was Andrew. But I felt so loved and so supported. I felt like we all were able to pull each other up to a higher level in our understanding. And in that workshop, I remember that week coming in, and I was just amazed. You know, I had grown up with all these adults, my family, friends, interpreters, all these different individuals who were hearing. Some of them were deaf as well. And they looked at me as hard of hearing. And I said, no, I feel a very strong connection to the deaf community and ASL. And they're like, no, you're hard of hearing. And my self-esteem suffered because of it. I felt like a lot of people were telling me how I am or identified me in a certain way, and I felt a little bit oppressed, and I was able to push back and say, I am deaf, after that week-long workshop. During that workshop, we shared a lot with the participants. We all shared our experiences and how we all felt oppressed and the struggles that we had with identity and all these different issues that we had dealt with throughout our lives. And after that workshop, I felt a lot of support and had a lot of networking opportunities while I was there at the Eastern Kentucky University. After EKU, I went to Gallaudet University and studied linguistics, got a master's in linguistics, and then moved to Iceland. Growing up, I had been labeled hard of hearing, and I was a little bit scarred from that label. I had this label that had been attached to me, and I was not able to remove that label while I was growing up. Because of all the love and support I got from those 3 instructors, and everybody else, but those 3 were champions for me. After that experience, I can envision my life working every day, interacting with hearing individuals, not signing very much, still speaking most of the time. But it was because of my experience at EKU that I really started to take steps, and my life started to change and take off for the positive. And now, I identify myself as a capital D deaf individual. I speak 4 languages: Icelandic, ASL, English, and 1 other. But my life, I feel so much happiness and satisfaction being deaf. And I look back with fond memories on the support that I got. And now, when I look forward and I see other individuals coming up or growing up, I pass that support on. That experience passes on to them through me. Thank you for watching. This is Karen speaking. Any common themes that you recognized in this small vignette? My name is Shauna, and talking about identity, labels that are placed on an individual. A person who's hard of hearing, but they identify with being a deaf person. Signing and the labels, that even from a very early age, being labeled, that's a common experience. I learned through experience growing up, being placed into an oral classroom, and then going to the deaf school. I found myself processing and really connecting with the deaf thought process, whereas as growing up in an oral classroom, I felt very disjointed, did not connect with what was going on, and felt a lot of confusion. And then when I went into a deaf classroom, I felt much more at ease. Everybody, is that clear? Are you able to understand? Common words, the support system, having a support system, one that's already in place, not having to join one. Whereas the hearing world, you feel so disconnected, so disjointed, where a lot of times you immediately connect with the deaf culture. This is Stephen. I just want to add, in addition to the comment about thought process and cognitive skill, just being there. And oftentimes people feel very depressed. They're having to really process what's going on in a culture that's not really familiar to them, and how they express themselves. It's like having a bullseye with different rings, and then in the center, feeling like you're being pulled up. Maybe you feel offended or there's something wrong with you. And then if the convention is, you're feeling like you're being lifted up and you're able to express. And another approach is like a stop sign, where you're really processing all of the comments in your mind. And the point is, it's a very, a lot of negativity. I feel lousy. I can't do this. I can't do that. There's a lot of negative self-talk. So I use a stop sign to, try and stop that, think about stopping that, and switching over to a more encouraging model where we all are lifted up. And, I'd say it's about a 50-50 success rate, but I feel pretty good about those points. I want to share a personal story with my mother. I have deaf parents. Should I come up to the front? Yeah, that would be better. Well, this way you can all see me. My name is Sean, and I want to share a personal experience. As a deaf mom, I've got 3 children. The first one's deaf, the other 2 are CODIS, children of deaf adults. And the second child identifies with the deaf culture and being placed into the right environment. My child's a CODA who's losing their hearing and identifies with deaf support, using deaf resources and being provided an environment, the right environment to flourish. Now that child is being placed in deaf school and they're really flourishing, and that second child is really happy being in that environment. You were talking about the bullseye and where you hit the mark, and a lot of it depends on the environment and the support that individual receives. Okay, last comment in the back. I noticed several of the comments and talking about journey. It's not a direct route. You don't go directly from point A to point B, but you take a lot of detours through this journey, and through those experiences, you realize what you learn from the diverse experiences that you have. And also teaching deaf students about the culture that they have will help build their self-esteem. That's normal. We talked a lot about processing, and one comment really stuck, briefly I want to mention, about spoken language, hearing, spoken language being very linear. A lot of times it's very short, 7 seconds. And in ASL, you can create a visual picture in 3 seconds. So depending on a very strong English approach or the interpretive approach, based on English, you get a word at a time, and then that 7 seconds you have to process and interpret what that was into a more visual representation of what was spoken. It takes a lot of time and effort, and it's very exhausting. This is Amy. I want to add 2 additional comments based on what you guys said. One was collectivism. It takes a village. There's a lot of support from everyone in the village. The individual decides who they are. We don't label them. We don't place them in a box. You are X, Y, or Z, and you have to follow these standards based on that identity. But the individual can incorporate many layers of culture that they have experienced and take on those aspects of becoming who they are. I am deaf, and I bring with me some of my culture from my family, also some culture from who I interact with and learn from, and it's not limited, it's very diverse.
Good.
this is a cartoon I just wanted to share with you as well. It's very visual. This comic is a representation of the sandwich. Yeah, we can go back to the other one. So we're now on the slide that talks, the comic that's labeled That Deaf Guy. Okay, great. We'll move on to the next comic about cultural conflicts. And this talks about the differences between hearing culture and deaf culture. Being very polite, kind of masking the point, where deaf people tend to be very direct and say, you know, I'm not satisfied, please tell me this. This is Karen speaking. Just wanted to add another comment. As a deaf person and having children, hearing children that are coda, it's my responsibility to teach them both perspectives, and so they have cultural competency in both worlds. We're getting down to about 15 minutes left, so we'll move on. Terminology and perspectives, talking about deaf, capital D deaf, someone who identifies with using ASL, this person cherishes the language, versus someone who considers it broken English or a loss. That person has a hearing loss. They feel more sympathy towards this person. A lot of times social workers or other fields, they have a very different perspective from where they come from versus someone who's deaf and how their perspective of the culture. There's also information that has a lot of different perspectives. For example, communication. A lot of times they think it means passing communication to the individual, whereas a deaf person might think it's more of dialogue. It's an exchange. From the hearing perspective, it's an exchange of facts. Let me repeat that so we can just clarify. Where was I? I lost my train of thought. Okay, so for communication, when a deaf person needs communication, they're wanting information. It means it's something that's passed on to them. And then based on their experience, they've been reliant on a hearing person to provide them with that information. And now they can look at it as getting information for themselves. And the hearing perspective, communication is language. English is important to function in society. And here's facts provided for you to use for your benefit. And then language, and there was one more. There's connections, words, and ASL. So I'm going to skip down, well, let's see, wait, language. And language, here again, hearing view language, ASL is a broken language, broken English. So the deaf perspective is more, it's its own language. Sometimes we talk about MCE. So like a deaf person takes on this identity as something is wrong with my language, whereas a hearing person views that person being able to function in society. So one thing I want to emphasize is words. From my experience and my culture, a cultural conflict I had, I was working with other students who were all hearing. They were teaching about language and how words can be placed in different orders to change the meaning. And we were talking about changing the order of the signs, switching out different signs. And someone said that signs are not words. And I said, well, that would, signs, I would consider them words. And so we kind of both knew there was a cultural conflict, that was happening. We kind of had to put that discussion on hold, and we sat down and had a meeting about it. They didn't know that the word, from their perspective, word applied to any language, whereas from my perspective, the word was with their profession, associated with their profession. And we had two different definitions, working definitions of word, and that created a cultural conflict. And so we kind of started off in a very, like almost in an argument where we were talking about what the definition of word meant, and we kind of put that on hold so that we could clarify where our different perspectives and come to resolution around the conflict that was based on our different understanding of the word.
English is prioritized as being necessary to survive in the world, and so a lot more emphasis is put on English. But that people know what information is needed based on our experience to survive, and here people don't understand this. Okay. Based on the 10 minutes that we have left, we're trying to figure out what part we want to leave with. We're going to skip the comics and get to some of our final points. Cultural competency deficits. And what are our own deficits when it comes to cultural competency? Identity. As you saw from the videos we played, from those personal stories, identity is a big deficit. And they don't really develop that identity until later in life when they find that support system and figure out who they are after going through that journey, as one person said, that winding journey where they gain different experiences. So identity, self-esteem, feeling good about yourself and confident as a deaf person, that there's nothing wrong with me, even though that's the label that's been applied to me since I was a child. That we're not doing something right, that we've been colonized. And then role models. As you saw Nathaniel talk about those 3 role models he had at Eastern Kentucky and how much they meant to him in his life, but he didn't get that until he was in college. So for those first 20 years, he didn't have those role models. So it's important for us to understand that deaf people, hard of hearing people need somebody to look up to. And the resources are limited in that regards. Who can they look up to in your area, especially in rural areas? With technology, things are better. We have better role models and access to better role models, but we still need to be creative in figuring out with video conferencing and technology, but we still need people face-to-face. We still need role models that people can see face-to-face, so we need to work on that. Okay, so in high school, just real briefly, I thought of myself as hard of hearing because I could read lips. I couldn't hear anything, but I could read lips, so I called myself hard of hearing. And then in my junior or senior year, I was in a class with a hearing teacher who could sign, and that was an easy class, just kind of played around. And then that summer, I was in a class with a deaf teacher, and I had heard how mean they were, how tough they were. But during that class, this teacher disagreed with my identity, with what I call myself, and called a meeting, wanted me to work with this person in that classroom the next fall, and after that, I was hooked. I was learning so much, and it was because of this person who knew that I had this deficit, somebody else who could recognize what I was missing. It was thanks to this person that I eventually went to Gallaudet. If I didn't have that one teacher that one summer, I wouldn't have gone to Gallaudet. That one person who took the time to sit down with me and identify that deficit and be a role model. In education, there are different expectations, many expectations. In VR, we have different expectations and different ideas about what the people can do, and where can't is used too much. Expectations are set too low in education, in VR, and expectations need to be raised. kids, students, clients can succeed if we give them the resources that they need to succeed. Like Karen was talking about that one class. You know, that first class she was in with the hearing teacher had different expectations for her and different thoughts on her abilities and her future that weren't her full potential. You know, and if we in the VR field think that that person can only work in Target stocking shelves, even though we have bachelor's degrees, even though we have master's degrees, even if those, we need to change those expectations. And we need to look at the individual and their potential rather than what our preconceived ideas are, so that we can give them what they need to reach their maximum potential as clients and as students. One moment. Okay, so frames again. Expectations. You know, the individual has their thoughts on what they can do, what they can't do, and sometimes those frames need to be adjusted. Sometimes we need to give them harder expectations. Sometimes people don't realize what they can do. I was teaching, and there was a hearing student in class, and then there was another girl who was deaf in class, and we were learning how to, in 6th grade, learning division. And it felt like the one girl's answers were going to be also asked her to check her work. And her answer was wrong, but what she had done was multiply instead of divide. And she got the multiplication problem right. So what I did was teach. I saw a deficit and I taught. Often what the deaf experience is in hearing classrooms is that the hearing person or the hearing system thinks that the deaf people can't do it, and so they lower the expectations rather than actually teach what's missing. Another deficit area is socialization skills, social skills. Deaf people are put in mainstream classrooms, LRE, least restrictive environment, that's what people think, but there are a lot of problems that result from that. The deaf student is isolated, they're on their own, it's least restrictive environment. For some deaf people, it's a school for the deaf, where they have complete access, and it's not least restrictive. But the establishment, the institutions think that the mainstream classroom is the least restrictive environment. But where is their support, where's the language? And also social skills, something we always think about, and self-advocacy skills. As Denise, the first person we watched today, realized eventually that in a hearing classroom with an interpreter, she was doing too much work doing the interpreting in her head, and it wasn't until she was in a deaf classroom that she was able to reach her full potential and learn the content. So, you know, self-advocacy skills, finding that classroom that works for them, or even finding that interpreter that works for them, and being able to advocate for that. And then knowing your rights is another deficit. Skip that, skip that. So it's important to understand the differences in culture. Not just understand one culture, the deaf culture or the hearing culture, but understand the differences and how they come together. These two did research with language deficits. One thing just to part with, there are a lot of videos in our PowerPoints and a lot of other information that we couldn't share with the DARA. And now that we're here, we can upload it on their website so that now you can take a look at it. Okay, so please do take the time after this workshop to look at all of our information and all of the videos that we have. This one is talking about the differences in culture when it comes to Deaf Plus and Hispanic culture, and how to more successfully work with those different cultures, and the overlap, the parallels between Deaf culture and Latino culture. This person, Jimmy Feldman, working with a person who had no language, no English, very limited ASL. He's a refugee and immigrant from another country, so the person he was working with had very limited language. And And so he started with what the person had, what the person needed, what culture they brought to the table, and built from that. This person was Muslim, and prayer was important in their cultures. So there were things that you couldn't understand as far as time. Didn't know time, but he didn't know prayers. And there was morning prayers. You do morning prayers, and then you go to work. And then midday prayers. And so he was able to use that as a basis for spending time. And then language deprivation. Naomi Castelli did some research on that. And so now tips. What can you do to be successful? Seize opportunities to learn about the different cultures. Netflix has a whole lot of information, a whole lot of documentaries and different things on culture that you can watch, just to learn about those people's culture. Engage the deaf community. The deaf community knows their culture. They know the community. Hearing people can never fully understand deaf culture and deaf communities, so utilize their expertise. When you're looking for a specialist, get a deaf person to help in the process. And cultural competency means accommodating to them, not expecting them to accommodate to us. And I just want to make sure that that point gets through. That's what we're talking about when it comes to cultural competency. Okay, and then actively encourage participation in professional learning communities. And we're talking at every level with kids, bachelor's, master's, professional, share information. Deaf role models is key. If deaf people don't have role models, the world is really limited. So all of this stuff, other resources, other ideas. Buzzwords. Remember, access to information. There are buzzwords out there that we don't know, that have to be taught. And so we need to know those buzzwords and be able to use those buzzwords so that in our professional and educational environments, the other people in the room view us as equals. Tips. Use CDIs. They are language proficient. Sometimes we don't think we're doing things that are oppressive. So we take a look and work on our own awareness of ourselves. Be cautious with word choices. We talked about that. And with the word choices, I mean, sometimes we think, oh, you don't understand this, let me dumb it down for you. Let me explain it in simpler terms. The word choices and how we talk about what we talk about are important as well. Okay, any questions about any on this last slide? Any questions about this tips? Are there any questions about these tips that we have up right now? Talking about that linear and non-linear thinking and writing. Are you aware of that for both deaf and hearing? Because the system doesn't recognize that difference. I have a hearing daughter who's struggling with linear writing. So thank God I'm deaf. And I can teach the school so they get it, and I can advocate for all those different things. Right, and it's important not to put people in a box. Oh, you're hearing, oh, you think linearly, you speak linearly. There is diversity within each group, and it's important to recognize that. Okay, promote self-growth. So hopefully your frame is in a different position. You have a little bit of a different frame than you did when you sat down this morning. And Adara wants to open new pathways for deaf people. And so these were some tips that we hope we wanted to impart to help with that. for your success and for your client's success, for everybody. Any other questions? No? Then, again, just to remind you, we will share this PowerPoint with the DARA. They will upload that so that you can look at that at your leisure. Thank you very much.